They don't deserve a dime. That's the first thing I heard my mother say in the lawyer's office that morning. Her voice wasn't shaky or emotional. It was sharp, cutting, as if she'd rehearsed those words over and over. She didn't even look at me when she said it. She looked at the man across the desk, the attorney my grandparents had trusted, as if I wasn't in the room at all. What would you do if your own parents tried to erase you from your life? Stay with me. This story will grip your heart and not let go until the very last word. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, letting the silence stretch. I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. But there was something about hearing your own mother speak of you like an unwanted stranger that settled heavy in your chest. Instead of breaking down, I kept my eyes steady, watching her with a calmness that made her uncomfortable. She didn't know I had something she could never touch. Hidden deep in my purse was a letter my grandmother had written just for me. I had read it only once, late at night when I couldn't sleep, the ink blurred where her hand had trembled. I didn't bring it here to wave in her face. No, it wasn't time for that. Not yet. The lawyer cleared his throat, glancing nervously between us. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, the will is clear. Your daughter is the sole heir. His voice cracked slightly, like he already knew what kind of storm was brewing. Papers rustled on his desk, the clock ticked faintly on the wall, and somewhere down the hall I could hear the low hum of a copier. It was all so ordinary, but inside that office the air felt heavy, too still, like before a thunderstorm. My father leaned forward, his palm flat against the desk. You can't expect her to manage something of this scale. $30 million? She'll throw it away. We're her parents. We'll handle it for her. His words came out smooth, almost reasonable, but I caught the tightening of his jaw, the way his knuckles pressed white into the wood. I opened my mouth, not to argue but to say something simple. I'm capable. Just 2 words. My voice didn't rise, didn't shake. But the way my mother's head snapped toward me, eyes flashing with something between disbelief and fury, told me those words hit harder than if I had screamed. Her lips curled into a tight smile. You, capable? You can't even keep a houseplant alive. She said it loud enough that even the receptionist outside must have heard. A deliberate humiliation crafted to make me feel small. But I didn't bite. I sat back in the chair, smoothing my skirt as if her words had bounced right off me. Inside, though, I felt the sting. My cheeks warmed, my heart quickened, but I let none of it show. Instead, I looked at the attorney, gave him the faintest nod, and watched the unease flicker across his face. He could see what they couldn't. That calm wasn't weakness. It was calculation. The clock struck 11. A strip of sunlight cut across the floor through the half-closed blinds. Dust floated in the beam like tiny sparks. My father's voice droned on, talking about responsibility, stability, about how they had always guided me. I let him talk. Every word dug their hole deeper. Every claim exposed their greed. While they argued, my eyes wandered to the family picture on the lawyer's shelf. His wife, his children, all smiling in front of a Christmas tree. I wondered if he realized how different his office felt today with us in it. This wasn't a family. This was a battlefield disguised in polite words. Enough. I finally spoke again, louder this time. The word hung in the air like a crack of lightning. My parents fell silent, twin glares fixed on me. You've said what you needed to. I've heard enough. My mother's chair screeched against the floor as she stood. She leaned across the desk, her perfume sharp in my nose, her finger stabbing the air in my direction. If you think you're going to keep this from us, you're mistaken. We made you. We can break you. There was the threat, naked and raw. My stomach twisted, but not with fear. With clarity. They had finally said out loud what I'd always known. Love was never part of this equation. Control was. I rose slowly, sliding the strap of my purse over my shoulder. I didn't argue, didn't defend myself. I just met her eyes, steady and unflinching. We'll see. 2 words again. Short. Measured. Enough to tell her I wasn't bending. The lawyer tried to intervene, his hands fluttering nervously over the papers. Perhaps we should reconvene another day. Emotions are high. But my father cut him off with a sharp motion of his hand. No. We'll settle this now. His voice was iron, but beneath it I heard something else. Desperation. That was when I noticed it. A small detail, almost invisible, but it caught my eye. My father's hand trembled slightly as he gathered the documents, just for a second before he steadied it. He was afraid. He wouldn't admit it, not even to himself, but he knew the inheritance was already slipping beyond his grasp. I walked toward the door, the heels of my shoes tapping against the polished floor. Each step felt deliberate, a countdown. I could feel their eyes drilling into my back, could almost hear the words they wanted to hurl. I didn't give them the satisfaction of turning around. As my hand touched the doorknob, I paused. Just for a heartbeat. The sunlight shifted again, glinting off the brass. I considered saying something, revealing the letter in my purse, the advantage I carried. But no. Timing mattered. Secrets once spilled lost their power. So instead I opened the door. The cool air of the hallway rushed over me, a relief after the stifling weight of that room. I stepped out, closing it softly behind me, leaving their rage sealed inside. And that's where it ended for the moment. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with silence. Silence I owned. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing their voices inside that suffocating office. But their words followed me down the hall like shadows that refused to let go. My heels struck the linoleum in sharp, deliberate beats, yet each step carried a weight heavier than the last. By the time I reached the street, the air felt thinner, as if even the morning sunlight couldn't wash their venom away. I drove straight to the house where I had grown up, the house that had once smelled of my grandmother's pies cooling on the windowsill, where the walls echoed with Sunday hymns and family stories. But that day, as I walked up the front steps with my keys in hand, something felt off. The door handle was cold, unfamiliar. I pushed the key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, harder this time, until the metal scraped loudly. Nothing. My father had changed the locks. The realization settled in my stomach like lead. I stood there on the porch, my suitcase in the car behind me, staring at the chipped paint on the door that had once welcomed me home. My hand shook against the brass handle, not from weakness, but from the chilling confirmation that this wasn't just about money. They wanted me erased, physically, emotionally, piece by piece. I knocked once, then again louder. Footsteps shuffled inside. The door creaked open just a few inches and my mother's face appeared in the gap. Her lips curved in a smile too sweet to be real. "Oh, didn't the lawyer tell you? You won't be staying here anymore." Her words slid out soft, but the venom underneath stung worse than if she had screamed. I pushed at the door, but she kept her foot braced behind it. The smell of her perfume drifted out, heavy and cloying. I caught a glimpse of the hallway behind her. Bare walls, picture frames gone. The photographs of my childhood, the ones that had lined the corridor for decades, had been stripped away. "You took them down?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. "They didn't belong to you," she said simply, shutting the door with a firm click. For a moment I stood there frozen, staring at the closed door. Then I turned slowly, scanning the house from the outside. Curtains that once fluttered in the breeze were pulled tight. My father's car sat in the driveway, but he didn't come out. The house looked smaller somehow, as if it had shrunk in on itself, trying to spit me out. I heard a rustle across the street. Mrs. Donnelly, our neighbor, was standing by her mailbox, pretending to shuffle through letters, though her eyes never left me. She gave a small, polite wave, hesitant, curious. She had probably already heard whispers. News traveled fast in neighborhoods like ours. I forced a thin smile, then walked back to my car. My hands trembled on the steering wheel before I tightened my grip. That night, I parked behind the grocery store, the only place I knew I wouldn't be noticed. The air inside my car was stale, heavy with the faint scent of old coffee. I reclined the seat, hugging my coat around me. My body ached from exhaustion, but sleep wouldn't come. The hum of distant traffic filled the silence, broken only by the occasional clatter of a shopping cart abandoned by a late worker. I stared up through the windshield at the dark sky. Somewhere beyond those clouds, the stars shone just as they had when I was a little girl lying in my grandparents' backyard, my grandmother's hand resting gently on mine as she whispered stories about resilience and dignity. "Never let anyone take your place in this world," she had said once. The memory stung, sharp and fresh. By dawn, my eyes were gritty, my throat dry, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. Their cruelty had pushed me to the edge, but instead of breaking me, it had hardened something inside. I wasn't a helpless girl anymore. I was a woman who had endured, who had outlived their control. The next morning I drove back to the house, not to beg but to see. The front lawn was trimmed, almost too neat, as if they were trying to polish the outside while rotting it from within. I walked the perimeter slowly, my shoes crunching against the gravel. Through the kitchen window, I saw my father sitting at the table with a newspaper, his face half hidden behind the pages. My mother moved about, pouring coffee, her back straight, her movements sharp. When I knocked, my father finally came to the door. He didn't bother with smiles. He stepped outside, closing it firmly behind him, his arms crossed. "Why are you here?" "This is my home," I said quietly, though my voice carried a strength even I hadn't expected. "No," he replied, his tone flat. "This was our home. You forfeited that when you decided to keep what doesn't belong to you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but the lump in my throat kept the sound from escaping. The will was clear. It belongs to me. They wanted me to have it. His eyes flickered just for a second, then hardened again. "We'll see about that." Those words, the same ones I had said to my mother in the lawyer's office, struck me like a challenge thrown back in my face. I turned and walked away, not trusting myself to speak further. The gravel crunched under my feet, the autumn air sharp in my lungs. I could feel his eyes boring into my back, but I didn't look back. That evening, I sat in the diner down the street, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The waitress, a girl barely 20, asked if I wanted a refill. I shook my head, staring at the steam rising from another customer's plate of eggs. All around me, conversations buzzed. Ordinary people talking about work, school, weekend plans. For them, life was steady, predictable. For me, it felt like the ground beneath my feet had cracked open. I pulled the letter from my grandmother out of my purse. The edges were frayed, the ink faded in spots. I traced her handwriting with my fingertip, her words etched into my heart. She had known. Somehow she had known they would try to take everything from me. By the time I folded the letter back, my path was clear. I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my place, for the right to exist in the home and the life they wanted to erase. That night I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't curse their names. I sat in my car with the engine off, hands steady on the steering wheel, and let the silence wrap around me like armor. Resolve. That's what it was. Cold, sharp, unyielding. And in that stillness I made a promise. Not out loud, not written down, but carved deep inside. They would regret ever underestimating me. That thought sat heavy but steady inside me, as sure as my own heartbeat. I carried it into the morning like a hidden flame, small but burning. My parents thought they had won. They thought locking me out, stripping the walls, parading their control in front of the neighbors would leave me powerless. They didn't realize I had already started to think differently. Not like a daughter, not like a victim, but like someone who knew how to wait, how to set pieces in motion quietly. The first step was simple. I had to make them believe I was giving in. That afternoon I drove back to the house, the same one where my mother had shut the door in my face. This time I didn't knock with desperation. I knocked with patience. She opened the door with that same tight smile, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "I want to talk," I said calmly, my voice even. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I can't handle everything on my own." Her eyebrows lifted, surprise softening the sharpness in her expression. She opened the door wider. Behind her, the hallway looked emptier than before, as if they had already started erasing my presence from every corner. I stepped inside slowly, the familiar creak of the floorboards echoing under my shoes. My father appeared from the living room, his newspaper folded under one arm. "Changed your mind?" he asked, his voice thick with skepticism. I forced a small smile, careful, measured. "Maybe I need your guidance. Maybe you can help me manage the money, at least for now." They exchanged a quick glance, almost too fast to notice, but I caught it. A silent victory passing between them. They thought I was folding, bending back into the role of the obedient child. They had no idea what I was really setting in motion. We sat at the dining table, a place where countless family meals had once been shared. But now the air smelled faintly of polish and lemon cleaner, too sterile, too staged. Papers lay spread out in front of us. My father explained how I could transfer temporary control to them for safekeeping, his tone smooth, rehearsed. My mother chimed in with little nods and affirmations, as if they were trying to convince me of their generosity. I nodded along, pen in hand. I signed where they told me to, or at least they thought I did. What they didn't notice was the careful way I switched pages, slipping in copies I had prepared the night before at the library printer. My hands didn't tremble. My smile never faltered. They believed every move I made. When I left that evening, I could feel the weight of their satisfaction pressing against my back as I walked out the door. But inside my chest that flame burned brighter. They thought they had me. In truth, I had already begun planting the seeds of their undoing. Over the next few weeks, I perfected the art of pretending. I visited the bank regularly, my parents believing I was making withdrawals for them. In reality, each visit was another step in a careful plan. I opened accounts in my name only, tucked money into places they couldn't see, places they would never think to look. Every transfer was quiet, small enough to avoid attention but steady. At night, I sat in my car under the glow of streetlights, organizing papers in neat folders. The dashboard became my desk, the glove compartment my filing cabinet. My fingers ached from signing, from writing, from hiding. But with every paper I shuffled into place, I felt stronger. My parents, blind in their arrogance, only grew bolder. They boasted to relatives on the phone, their voices carrying through the thin walls of the house whenever I visited. "She finally understands," my mother said once, laughter in her tone. "We'll make sure the money doesn't go to waste." I would sit there, sipping tea I didn't want, nodding at their words, biting my tongue until it almost bled. But inside I was smiling, not out of joy but out of certainty. The more they bragged, the harder their fall would be. One evening, I returned to the house to find my mother rifling through my purse, her fingers deep inside the lining. She froze when she saw me standing in the doorway, her face paling. "Looking for something?" I asked, my voice low but steady. She laughed nervously, pulling her hand out too quickly. "Just checking if you left your keys in here." I smiled, slow and deliberate. "You don't need to worry. I know exactly where everything is." Her eyes darted to mine, searching for a crack, a weakness. She found none. She muttered something about dinner and hurried out of the room. But in that moment I knew she sensed it. A shift, a danger she couldn't name. To the outside world I remained quiet, compliant. Neighbors saw me carrying folders to and from my car, assuming I was helping my parents with errands. Even Mrs. Donnelly, always at her mailbox, gave me a sympathetic smile one morning. "It's good you're working with them," she said kindly. "Family should stick together." I thanked her, though the words caught in my throat. Family, I thought bitterly, had never been the word for what we were. Inside, every interaction became a move on the board. I learned to watch my parents closely, to memorize the way their eyes flickered when money was mentioned, the way their voices dropped when discussing our future. I learned to nod when they gloated, to laugh at their jokes, to agree when they told me what was best. And all the while I built my traps. Paper by paper. Signature by signature. By the end of that month I had created a structure so tight, so deliberate, that even if they tried to pull away, the walls would close in on them. They thought they were steering me. In truth, I was leading them exactly where I wanted them. Deeper into a cage they couldn't see. One night as I packed documents into my storage unit, the air cold and biting against my skin, I paused. My hands hovered over a folder labeled with my grandmother's handwriting. I opened it slowly, tracing the letters she had written years before. Her voice echoed in my memory. "Protect yourself from them." For the first time in weeks, tears burned behind my eyes. Not from fear. Not from sadness. But from the certainty that she had known this moment would come. She had left me more than money. She had left me a warning, a shield. I wiped the tears quickly, locking the folder away. Emotions had their place, but not here. Not now. I stepped out of the unit, the heavy metal door rolling shut behind me. The night smelled faintly of rain, the pavement damp beneath my shoes. I pulled my coat tighter and walked back to my car, the street lamp above flickering. In the silence of the night I let myself smile. Not the smile my parents knew, not the one that pretended to please them. This was different. Sharper. Stronger. Because I knew something they didn't. I had already won. They just hadn't realized it yet. That certainty carried me through the next morning like armor. The sky was pale, clouds hanging low, the kind of day where the air feels heavy before rain. I parked down the street from the house, the same house that had locked me out, stripped my photographs from the walls and tried to bury me in silence. Today I wasn't coming to knock or to beg. I was coming to watch it fall. At first it was only a sound, the sharp knock of fists against wood, voices raised just beyond the front door. I leaned against my car, arms crossed, watching as 3 men in dark jackets pounded on the porch. One of them carried a thick folder under his arm, the kind I'd seen often enough in courtrooms and banks. My mother opened the door, her robe pulled tight, her hair still pinned from sleep. "What is this about?" she snapped, though her voice cracked ever so slightly. "We need to speak with Mr. Carter," the man in front said. His tone was brisk, clipped, the kind of voice used when repeating bad news too many times in a day. My father appeared behind her, his expression darkening as he took in the sight. He stepped onto the porch, squaring his shoulders. "What's the meaning of this?" "Outstanding debts," the man replied, flipping open the folder. "You've defaulted on several accounts. Immediate action is required." I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I already knew. I had made sure of it. From where I stood, I watched my father's jaw tighten, his hand twitch at his side. My mother's face drained of color. The men didn't shout, didn't argue. They simply handed over the papers, their presence a silent hammer dropping. When the door closed behind them, I heard my mother's muffled cry. The sound hit me harder than I expected. Not pity, no, not after everything. But a strange heaviness, like hearing a song you used to love twisted out of tune. By midday the whispers had started. Neighbors lingered on sidewalks, their conversations hushed but not hushed enough. Mrs. Donnelly clutched her groceries a little tighter when she saw me, her eyes darting toward the house. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, though her tone carried more curiosity than sympathy. I gave her a polite nod, nothing more. Let her wonder. Let them all wonder. Inside the house, though, there was no wondering. There was only panic. That evening I was invited in for the first time in weeks. My father's face was lined deeper than I'd ever seen, his shoulders hunched under the weight of something he couldn't control. Papers littered the dining table, stacks of bills and notices spread like a battlefield map. "Did you know about this?" my mother demanded the moment I stepped inside. Her voice trembled with a mixture of fear and accusation. I kept my expression calm even as my chest tightened. "You told me you had everything under control," I answered softly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at my father instead, as if he could conjure an explanation. He only slammed his fist against the table, the papers scattering. "This doesn't make sense." "We didn't." He stopped himself, his eyes flicking toward me. For a moment, just a flicker, I saw it, suspicion. But then it was gone, swallowed by his frustration. He turned back to the papers, muttering under his breath. The next morning it escalated. A black sedan pulled up in front of the house, followed by another. Men in suits stepped out, carrying briefcases, their movements brisk and unyielding. I watched from the sidewalk as they walked past me without a glance, heading straight for the door. This time there was no polite knock. It was a raid, swift and precise. Boxes were carried out, files seized, drawers emptied. My mother shouted, her voice shrill, while my father tried to argue, his words swallowed by the sound of officers moving through the halls. Neighbors gathered again, their whispers louder now, some even pulling out phones to record. The house that once stood as their pride, the symbol of their control, was now a spectacle. And I stood there, steady, not gloating, not smiling, just watching. When my father was led out in handcuffs, his face red with fury, his eyes searched for mine. For a brief second our gazes locked. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. I didn't move. I didn't offer comfort. I simply held his gaze until he was pushed into the waiting car. My mother followed, her tears streaking down her cheeks. She cried out my name once, a desperate plea, but I didn't answer. The sound of the car door slamming shut drowned her voice, leaving only silence behind. That night I walked the empty halls of the house. The walls echoed with every step, stripped bare of the photographs, the laughter, even the arguments that once filled them. The lemon cleaner smell lingered faintly, a ghost of their attempt to control appearances. I ran my hand along the banister, the wood smooth under my fingertips. Memories surfaced, sliding down it as a child, my grandmother's gentle laugh as she scolded me softly. This house had once been a sanctuary, then a prison, and now, a tomb. As I moved through each room, I noticed small details I hadn't before. A crack in the ceiling above the dining table. A loose floorboard in the hallway. Signs of where they had ignored while pretending everything was perfect. It felt poetic in a way, the house itself crumbling just as they had. I stopped in my old bedroom, the walls bare, the bed stripped. The air smelled faintly of dust, untouched for weeks. I sat on the edge, the springs groaning under my weight. For the first time I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to feel the quiet not as loss but as freedom. Yet even in that stillness I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Their downfall had begun, but the true reckoning still lay ahead. The following day reporters came. Cameras lined the street, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted into the air. Did you know about the fraud? Were you aware of the debts? Do you think justice is being served? I said nothing. Silence, I had learned, was often louder than words. But inside I was listening. Every headline, every whispered question, every rumor, all of it layered another stone on their ruin. The image they had worked so hard to protect was shattered, their faces plastered across newspapers not as respected figures, but as examples of greed brought low. And through it all, I remained the quiet figure in the background, the one they had dismissed, underestimated, tried to erase. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had wanted me invisible. Now they were the ones erased. That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the lawn, I stood at the gate once more. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and earth. The house behind me stood hollow, its windows dark, its doors open to strangers carrying out boxes. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood steady, the way I had in the lawyer's office, the way I had when they locked me out. Because I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something greater. Their house had fallen. Their faces had been dragged through the dirt. But their true punishment, that was still waiting. I carried that thought with me as I walked away from the gate, my shoes crunching against the gravel. The air was cool, almost sharp, and for the first time in months my steps felt lighter. The house was no longer mine to enter or theirs to guard. It was nothing but a shell now, stripped of power. The next part of their fall wouldn't happen behind those walls. It would happen behind bars. A week later I stood in line at the county jail, the smell of disinfectant burning faintly in the air. The waiting room was filled with murmurs, the scrape of chairs, the hum of vending machines spitting out coffee that tasted like rust. My hands rested in my lap, steady. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. I was here for something I had earned, the final piece of my justice. When my turn came, an officer led me down a long corridor. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing faintly. My shoes echoed on the linoleum, each step taking me deeper into the belly of the place where my parents now lived. I thought of the life they once paraded, the tidy lawn, the perfect Christmas cards, the carefully polished image. No. Orange uniforms. Steel doors. Silence. The officer stopped at a thick glass partition. "You've got 10 minutes, he said before stepping aside. I sat down on the hard stool, picked up the receiver and waited. My mother was brought in first. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a limp bun, her face pale under the harsh lighting. She picked up her receiver slowly, her hands trembling. "You came," she whispered. "Yes," I said simply. My voice didn't waver. Her eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. We just wanted what was best." I leaned closer to the glass, my voice low but steady. "You wanted control. Don't lie to me now. Not here." She flinched as if I'd struck her, her tears spilling freely. "Please, you have to help us. You can fix this." I almost laughed. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded letter. The one my grandmother had written, the one I had carried like a secret weapon. I pressed it flat against the glass so she could see. Her eyes widened. She mouthed the words silently as she read the line near the bottom. "Protect yourself from them." Her lips trembled. She shook her head, whispering, No. "Yes," I answered softly. "She knew what you were. Long before I did." Then my father was brought in. His posture was still rigid, his jaw tight, but his eyes gave him away. They darted around the room, restless, unsettled, until finally landing on me. He picked up the receiver with a clatter. "You set this up," he growled. "All of it, didn't you?" I met his gaze without blinking. "Yes." For the first time he faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. The moment he realized he had underestimated me one final time. "You think this makes you strong?" he spat. "You've destroyed your own family." "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed it the day you tried to erase me." I just held up the mirror. Silence stretched across the line. He gripped the receiver tighter, his knuckles white. Behind him, a guard shifted, clearing his throat. My father leaned forward, his voice dropping. "You'll regret this." But I only smiled. "No. You will." The officer tapped his watch, signaling my time was nearly up. I slid the letter back into my purse, stood and looked at them both one last time. My mother's tears blurred her vision. My father's glare tried to burn through me. "Goodbye," I said simply, hanging up the receiver. As I walked back down the corridor, the fluorescent lights buzzing above, I felt no weight on my shoulders. No guilt. No doubt. Only clarity. Outside, the sun was just beginning to rise. The air smelled of dew, fresh and sharp. I stood on the steps for a long moment, breathing it in. The world felt new, cleansed, as if I had shed the last chains of their control. Neighbors would keep whispering. Reporters would keep asking questions. But none of that mattered now. The battle wasn't mine anymore. It was finished. On my drive home, I passed by the house one last time. The windows were boarded, the lawn overgrown. A foreclosure notice flapped in the wind against the front door. The place that had once been my prison was now just another empty structure, waiting to collapse. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed. Weeks later, I found myself back at my grandparents' graves. The cemetery was quiet, the wind rustling through the tall grass. I knelt, placing fresh flowers against the stone, my fingers brushing the carved names. "I did what you asked," I whispered. "I protected myself. And I made sure they can never hurt me again." The weight that had pressed on me for so long lifted little by little, until all that remained was peace. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry. Not the bitter, angry tears I had held back before, but soft ones, cleansing, final. As I stood to leave, I caught my reflection in the polished surface of the stone. For a moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the timid daughter, not the erased child. This woman was steady, strong, whole. Justice wore my face that day. And it always would. If this story touched you, subscribe for more dark, emotional revenge stories. Every week I bring you powerful tales of betrayal and justice. Stories you'll never forget.